New at 6 o'clock, legal filings from the Florida Division of Administrative Hearings show St. Vincent's Medical Center has agreed to accept liability and participate in arbitration proceedings for the purpose of determining damage amounts in at least a few of the hundreds of lawsuits filed against the health system and against a former orthopedic surgeon there. Other patients whose lawsuits are pending in civil court accuse Dr. David Heekin of causing hundreds of devastating injuries during knee and hip replacements because he was operating while impaired by a progressive neurological condition from 2016 to 2020, and that the hospital knew that he was impaired but did not protect patients. The hospital has denied wrongdoing. News4JAX I-TEAM investigator Ann Maxwell has obtained a lot of new information on these cases. Ann?
Tom, tonight we've obtained video of Dr. Heekin from a 2019 deposition while he was still practicing medicine that shows him slurring his speech, a symptom plaintiffs allege was caused by progressive supranuclear palsy. We've also obtained the transcripts of depositions given by St. Vincent's chief medical officer and former director of surgical services. And their depositions both testified about the concerns brought to them about Dr. Heekin and how they reacted. This deposition shows Dr. David Heekin in August of 2019 testifying as an expert witness. He was a practicing orthopedic surgeon at Ascension St. Vincent's Riverside Hospital at the time.
What was the next step that was taken to try to solve the problem?
Well, we had a patient that had pain, had a lawsuit pending, and that nothing wrong with that, I understand. But lawsuit pending, had pain.
Dr. Heekin is also heard slurring his speech in an audio clip from February of 2019. Plaintiffs allege this was recorded by a patient.
When did we put that? When did we do the IND and put that wound back on?
It put it on January 26th.
St. Vincent's Medical Center's chief medical officer, Dr. Jeff Matheson, was shown those audio and video clips during his 2021 deposition. He said, "I did not hear a difference in that audio from what I normally hear of Dr. Heekin," and that the video clip was consistent in how he remembered Dr. Heekin from 2018. This video of Dr. Heekin is from a deposition taken in August of 2020, a few months after he retired.
Did you work July 4, 2019?
Oh, no. What'd you have for dinner? I don't know.
In his deposition, Dr. Matheson says Dr. Heekin was known for outbursts from before 2018 when he arrived at the hospital. Dr. Heekin is now accused of botching hundreds of surgeries from 2016 to 2020, with plaintiffs alleging he was impaired by progressive supranuclear palsy, which according to the Mayo Clinic is a rare brain disorder caused by brain cell deterioration that worsens over time. Signs and symptoms include loss of balance and poor eye movement, in addition to slurred speech, impulsive behavior, and cognitive difficulties, which may mimic Parkinson's and dementia. According to the former director of surgical services at St. Vincent's Riverside, Don Galloway, Dr. Heekin's decline was discussed among healthcare providers at the hospital, with multiple people bringing complaints about him, including concerns he was impaired, not the same surgeon, and a shell of the man he once was. He says he was also alerted to concerns about the doctor's speech, gait, and overall affect. Galloway says he did not notice any changes in Heekin's physical or mental abilities when he first met him in September of 2019 to when Heekin retired in April of 2020. The CMO testified that he relied on operating room leadership like Galloway to raise issues to him. But Galloway's deposition testimony reflects that he dismissed some nurses and surgical technicians' concerns about Heekin as hearsay or gossip that was emotional or dramatic, saying he needed to assess complaints before taking them to the CMO. He said he would spend about 5 or 6 minutes in the OR with Dr. Heekin to determine whether any concerns were apparent, and if he didn't see anything abnormal, no concerns would be reported. Galloway also testified in his deposition one of his responsibilities was to generate case volume, figuring out how to do more cases in a day, and he spoke to the CEO in March of 2020 about a revenue victory, saying surgical services had a record month. The CMO testified that he initiated an investigation into Heekin's conduct in September of 2019, when a surgery of Dr. Heekin's was canceled after the patient's family said they didn't feel comfortable with him operating because he looked tired and wasn't making sense. The CMO testified that he immediately activated the medical staff licensed practitioner health committee, which remained active through the rest of Dr. Heekin's career. He also testified he told Dr. Heekin that he needed to voluntarily stop doing surgery in the facility until they could adequately investigate. He testified Dr. Heekin was cleared to practice by a neurologist on October 6th. After that, plaintiffs allege healthcare providers continued to complain about Dr. Heekin, with the director of surgical services, Don Galloway, saying a robot was brought in to help Dr. Heekin operate near the end of his career because there were concerns about his surgical outcomes. Galloway also testified that the CMO told him he hoped COVID would lead Dr. Heekin to retire. Galloway says Heekin carried weight at St. Vincent's and that, quote, the hospital was built around Dr. Heekin's clinic. He also said the patient should be the one to determine if a surgeon is impaired. He also said diagnosing a physician's underlying neurological condition is something a specialist would have to determine through tests. Records show St. Vincent's has accepted liability in some cases and agreed to participate in arbitration to determine the appropriate damage amounts. But in court records on a different case, the hospital has denied allegations of wrongdoing and filed its own cross-claim against Dr. Heekin and the Heekin Clinic, alleging the doctor and not the hospital should be liable to the plaintiffs for any damages. An attorney for St. Vincent's declined to comment today, and we have not heard back from attorneys for Dr. Heekin and the Heekin Clinic.